The Black Harvest. Chapter 3. The Harvest Ode. The journal's last entry seemed to burn into Thomas's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb's warning wasn't the rambling of a drunken man, but a desperate cry for help. He spent the next few days scouring Dredmoor for any answers, visiting the places where Caleb had frequented, most notably the small, ancient chapel on the edge of town. It was a decaying structure, barely standing but steeped in the town's superstitions. The locals avoided it, whispering about how it was the site of old rituals, practices long since forgotten. When Thomas entered, the smell of damp wood and mildew hit him immediately. The air inside felt heavier, almost suffocating, as though someone was lingering just beyond his sight. The few candles that burned on the altar flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. At the back of the chapel, Elias Wren, the town elder, knelt before the altar. His hands were folded in prayer, but his eyes were wide open, unfocused, as if he were lost in thought, or perhaps lost to something darker. Thomas approached cautiously, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. "Elias," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "I need to talk to you about Caleb." The old man's eyes snapped to him, their gaze sharp as a hawk's. "You shouldn't be here, Thomas. The harvest is coming. Best leave it be." "I can't," Thomas replied, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "Caleb's missing, and I think something's happening in this town, something to do with the harvest." Elias stood slowly, his old joints creaking. "You don't know what you're asking, boy. The harvest takes what's owed. It always has." Thomas clenched his jaw, trying to suppress the unease creeping up his spine. "What does that mean? What's owed?" Elias sighed deeply, running a hand through his thinning white hair. "You really want to know? Very well." He turned away, his frail hands resting on the altar. Long ago, before the town was even called Dredmoor, there was famine. Crops failed, the land grew barren, and the people, they turned to something dark to survive. They made a pact with the reaper. In exchange for food, for the harvest, they gave a life. Thomas's heart pounded. A life? What kind of pact? A sacrifice. Every year, someone would be chosen. Their blood would be spilled to ensure the land would yield. Over the years, the pact was forgotten. But the Reaper remembers. And when the harvest calls, the Reaper demands what it is owed. The air grew colder, and Thomas's breath formed a mist in front of him. The chapel felt smaller now, more suffocating. The reality of what Elias was saying hit him with crushing weight. This wasn't just superstition. This wasn't just a local legend. This was a truth buried in the soil of Dredmoor. A truth that had festered for generations. "The Reaper," Thomas repeated, his voice hoarse. "The one Caleb mentioned." Elias nodded, his face grim. "It's been a long time since the last sacrifice, but it's coming back. The harvest demands its due." Thomas's mind spun. Caleb had been right. The disappearances, the strange behavior, the whispers, it was all connected. "What happens when the Reaper takes what it's owed?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Elias's eyes darkened. "It takes the soul, boy. It takes the blood. It claims what's due, and it leaves behind nothing but death." Thomas stood frozen, the full magnitude of his situation settling in. He wasn't just chasing a missing person. He was chasing an ancient evil, and Dredmoor was its hunting ground.